Welcome back to second semester. We are beginning now with something other than the indicative. Remember that we showed you in one lesson how you had all of the indicative right across the top of an imaginary chart that I had there. If you look at paragraph 589, you'll see that chart, everything you've learned across the top of that chart, and I'll let you look at it in your book. But you'll see that, and then you'll see that we're going to learn in this semester subjunctive, imperative, infinitive, and participle, along with a few other things. So we're getting into some grammar now, and I hope that you will enjoy. I'm sure you will. You'll enjoy it because it's going to get into some really fine points of interpretation in the word. So the first thing we want to do is just a couple of vocabulary words. See these two? You have proserkame, I come to, proserkame, I come to. That takes the dative. And then on usa on, the present participle of me, and it means being. On usa on, being. And incidentally, those forms for being will be the endings of the participle, as we'll see in just a moment. The first thing we want to do now is to look at the forms of the present and the present active and present middle and passive participle. We have them here. And these are in your book on page 102 and 103, respectively. You see, ignore this in the box for a moment, and you'll see that we have the present participle lined up here. Now, a participle is a verbal adjective. That is, it has a part of verb, the verb stem here you recognize already, li, and then the endings are really noun endings, or those nouns are the endings. The usage is going to be more adjectival, however. So, verb and then noun. Remember I told you learn articone? Articone, remember articone, arcandos, arcandi, arcanda, arcandes, arcandon, arcasi, arcandas. So we have those endings placed on the verb stem, and this is the masculine. Then you see over here in the neuter, we have the same endings again. So this is going to be very important to learn these. You have 24 forms. It's going to act as an adjective, therefore it has as many forms as an adjective. Then in the middle, in the feminine, you see li, u, sa, and then once you get the sa there, then you can go down just like you would for doksa, a, is, I, on, aon, s, as. The forms are the same as doksa in there. That should be an alpha. Otherwise, we have you see the forms there. Learn those 24 forms, and we'll talk about how they're used in just a moment. That is the present participle. Learn them across the top. Leon, liusa, leon. Leon, liusa, leon. And then down in each gender. Now, later on, we're going to look at the second aorist, and that will be on a different stem, but the same endings. That's why we have that there. Now, on the next page, page 103 in Machen, you see these forms. Leomenos, leomenos, and leomeni, leomenon, see? Now, again, you can see something very familiar about this. Once you get the men there, which is the sign of the middle or passive participle, then you have just like logos, just like graphi, just like thoron, all the way down. So take what you already know and put it on these forms, the participle stem and then those endings in there. Now, that's the easy part. We learn the participles by the forms rather easily, verb, noun, endings, and then we have to learn how to use them. Maybe a little reminder of what we did with agathos, the adjective. O agathos logos. Now, that is simply the good word. Or if we take a participle now, remember this participle is the nominative masculine singular. O leon logos would be the loosing word. The good word, the loosing word. So you're really doing the same thing with the participle that you were doing with the adjective. That's why I called it a verbal adjective. Then you had the same kind of thing in chapter 6. O agathos with no noun to modify. and that meant the good man, because it's masculine. Here we do the same thing, the loosing man. So in other words, a participle is going to have an adjective usage, modifying a noun. It's going to have a noun usage standing in the place of a noun. And then we're going to see one additional usage for the participle, and that's going to be the adverbial use, modifying the action of the verb. So what we want to do then is to talk about usage. Usage as Machen gives it, and then we want to talk about how we have tried to categorize it in the workbook. Notice on page 103 that we have the use of the participles. He says participles are verbal adjectives. Now I'm going to read through and make a few comments on Machen's text, and then we'll come back to other things. Being adjectives, they have gender, number, and case. And like other adjectives, they agree in gender and number and case with the nouns they modify. That's what you'd expect of an adjective. Then on the other hand, he says, they partake of the nature of verbs. They have tense and voice. And they receive, like other parts of the verb, adverbial modifiers. And if they be participles of a transitive verb, they can take a direct object. Now here's what he's saying about that. He's saying they have, this is a participle here, a participle can take an object. If it's a transitive verb, say what? Saying these things. They can take a direct object. They can also have adverbial modifiers. So they're enough of a verb to have an object, enough of a verb to have an adverbial modifier. They will not, for the most part, however, have a subject. They are verbal. They are not a finite verb which you can take a subject. They are simply a verbal having objects, having modifiers. Right? That's what he means by that section. Now, he gives an example. The apostle saying these things in the temple sees the Lord. Now he says the legon saying, and it agrees with apostle, so it's the apostle saying. And then he says it's in the present tense because the action which is denoted by is represented as going on at the same time as the action of the leading verb. Now that's important for the adverbial. He's saying that when we talk about the adverbial usage, modifying the action of the verb, he's saying that the apostle sees the Lord, and he is doing that at the same time as he is saying. So saying these things, the apostle sees the Lord. And this is the adverbial use, telling something that's going on at the same time as the time of the main verb. While he is saying these things, the apostle sees the Lord. And that's what he's saying here. There is a tie between this and the time of the main verb. Now, a little farther down that paragraph, 104, he says, it has an adverbial modifier, en to iro, we looked at that, has a direct object, tafta. Then he says, on the other hand, you follow me right down the middle of page 104. On the other hand, it has no subject, has a finite verb. The noun apostolos, which denotes the person represented as performing the action denoted by the participle, is not the subject of the participle, but the noun with which the participle, like any other adjective, agrees. Now, I have to show you this. He's saying that this legon, being nominative masculine singular, agrees with apostolos. Now, even though it agrees with it, and it is seen as doing this because it's the apostle sees the Lord while he, the apostle, is saying these things. So, while it's understood as doing the action, it is not the subject of the participle, it's the subject of the main verb. And we know that it's the apostle who is saying this because it's an agreement. If it were an accusative participle, it would be the Lord saying these things. While the apostle sees the Lord, while the Lord is saying these things. A difference in agreement there would make a different understood subject of the participle. That's all he's saying there. All I want you to do is to hear this, to see it in Machen, underline it in Machen, and then we'll come back and try to explain it in another way. Now, it gives another example in number 2 there, page 104. Vlepomen, ton apostolon legonda tafta en toiro. We see the apostle saying these things in the temple. Here he says the noun with which the participle agrees is accusative singular masculine. So you have legonda there. And apostolon is the word with which it agrees. Therefore, he says, the participle also must be singular, masculine, accusative, but its direct object and its adverbial modifiers are the same as in number 1. He's trying to show you that there may be different participle, a different agreement of the participle, but the other things will be the same. Number 3, same thing. We come to the apostle while he is saying these things in the temple. Again, to the apostle, to apostolo, is dative. And so we have the dative noun with which the participle agrees, legondi. Again, dative. They agree. So it's the apostle who is saying these things. That's the point. Now, so then what he says is, it won't be sufficient to translate simply saying these things. That's what he's done so far. The word legon means saying. So we come to the apostle saying these things in the temple. Saying is all right. That's an English participle. But it would be better if we did it with a clause. So top of 105 he says, the translation, 4th line down, the translation, we come to the apostle saying these things in the temple, would not do it all. For in English, in the English sentence, the participle saying would be understood as agreeing not with the apostle, but with the subject of the sentence. So we come to the apostle saying these things, then it's we who are saying them. And that's not what he intends at all. So what he says is we need to give up the literal idea, word for word, and we want to translate this with a temporal clause. Look what he says at the middle of this page now. When such temporal clauses are used to translate a Greek, the present participle, they are usually introduced by while. So we're going to have a temporal clause introduced by while to show that it's going on at the same time as the time of the main verb. So his translation then will be, down at the bottom of that paragraph, while the apostle is saying these things in the temple, he sees the Lord. Or, while he is saying these things in the temple, the apostle sees the Lord. I think that's less confusing. Again, number 4. While he is being taught by the apostle, the servants are coming to him. Now again, being taught would be the passive translation, translation of the passive participle. So while he is being taught, the while, because it's a present participle. And the he then would be a reference to the one who is coming. So what he's saying then is, here the didaskomeno agrees with afto, which like to apostolo in the preceding example is dative with the verb pros ergome. So all he's trying to tell us is that if you want to know who is doing the action of the participle, look to see what it agrees with, gender, number, and case. Then you'll know. That's with the adverbial. Now, the tense of the participle, 233. This is where he's going to explain now why he's using the while. The tense of the participle is relative to the time of the leading verb. Now we're outside of the indicative. We no longer have a time of action outside the indicative. So in the participle then, we're going to have to see a relative time. It's relative to the time of the main verb. It has no time of its own at all. It has kind of action, continuous or point, but it no longer has time of action. So the time will be related to the time of the main verb. That's what he's saying there in paragraph 233. The present participle there is used if the action denoted by the participle is represented as taking place at the same time as the action of the leading verb. If you want to say, he sees the Lord at the same time he is saying these things, then you use the present participle. If you want to say it another time, then we'll use a different participle. But for the present time, for the same time, it's the present participle. And that doesn't matter whether the leading verb is past, present, or future. You still use the present participle and say it's going on at the same time as the action of the main verb. Now look at his examples. While he was being taught by the apostle, the servants came to him. So, the servants came to him while he was being taught. Now, the afto agrees with the participle didaskomeno. So we know that it's he, the afto, that is understood as being taught. So the servants are coming to him, came to him while he was being taught by the apostle. So, present participle, same time as. And he is the one who is being taught. The second example, while he was going in the way, his disciples came to him. While he was going in the way. Now we know that it's he who was going in the way because the opto agrees with porevomeno. Right? So just watch the agreement, and let me show you here that agreement again in the adverbial. This agrees with apostolos, legon, nominative masculine singular, nominative masculine singular. So we know that it's the apostle who is saying these things. And we'll look for the agreement wherever we are with the adverbial usage. Then, I think we'll stop here and look at that adverbial usage in the workbook. We have a system, as you see on page 29 of the workbook, that helps you to put this thing in kind of a flow chart form. Now, we had the cover sheet, page 29, says there are 3 questions to ask whenever you translate a participle. Now, the adverbial participle is going to be in the predicate position. That is, it's not going to have the article. So you say to yourself, what position is this participle? Remember positions back in chapter 6? Article, adjective after the article, attributive. Well, it says here, if it is predicate position, that is, it is not preceded by the article, then it is adverbial. It modifies the action of the verb and is, number 1, diagrammed under the verb and is translated by the use of a temporal clause. See page 30. Now that's as far as you need to go on that page. You need to go to page 30 to see how to handle an adverbial participle. So we'll do that. Now, here's the example of an adverbial participle. The Greek construction is, note, it appears without the article. Legon, tafta, o apostolos, vlepo, ton, kyrion, or vlepi. Now, if we translated that using a simple English participle, all we'd have to do is translate saying, saying these things. But we've already seen that that doesn't work sometimes. Sometimes that can be confusing, so we'll not use that. We also will not use the English temporal clause, which would be our temporal phrase, which would be while saying these things. While saying these things still doesn't give us a subject, so we still don't know who's doing the saying. So we opt for the third usage, and that is using an English temporal clause. So whenever you translate a predicate position participle, the adverbial participle, always use a temporal clause while he is. Now, as I told you, the word saying translates the participle. So we have to justify using while, he, and is. Now follow this. I've numbered them down here, explaining how I got while, how I got he, how I got is. The while is used because the participle is present tense. Whenever you have a present tense participle, your temporal word will be while. Simple. Okay? Now that means then that the action of the present participle is seen as occurring at the same time as the main verb. That's what Machen said in paragraph 233. Now, the be here tells you if you have an aorist participle, use when. Don't worry about that at this point. Okay? While, present participle, that's all we're working on in chapter 18. Now, look at B. Look at 2. When the subject of the temporal clause is determined by the noun or pronoun or unexpressed subject of the verb with which the participle agrees in gender, number, and case. We have it here down at the bottom, see? The subject of this participle, the action of the participle, is determined by the word with which it agrees, gender, number, and case. So that's why we said he, referring to apostle. Then, third, we have to have a helping verb because this is here, or this saying, is not a finite verb, so it can't be a clause. In order to make that a clause, you have to put a helping verb with it, to be verb. Is, was, something. Well, here's why you choose the helping verb. The helping verb in the temporal clause is determined by the time of the main verb of the sentence. If it's a present or future time, then you use is or are. Now look at the sentence. Vlepi, present time. So because this is present time, in our clause we'll use is. So back up to this English temporal clause. While he is saying, the apostle sees the Lord. That's our translation. So the three things, the temporal word while, because the participle is present time. He, because the participle agrees in gender, number, and case with apostolos. And is, because the main verb is present time. We use an is, a present time helping verb. That's our clause. Using the flow chart, we're able then to go into a very logical scheme with this. And all that Machen has said is included in pages 30 and 29 and 30 for the adverbial use. Now, it goes on then to the attributive participle. Remember, we have not only the adverbial use that we had there, but we have also an adjective use. There has an article. Remember, these two are attributive position. This one is predicate position, no article. So whenever it has no article, immediately under the verb, no problem. If it has an article, then you have to say, is it adjective use or noun use? The same way we did with the adjective in chapter 6. If it has a noun to modify, then you diagram it under that noun. If there's no noun to modify, then it takes the place of a noun. It's the man who is saying these things, and not the apostle who is saying these things. So the same idea we have with agathos, we have now with legon in this case. All right, let's see what Machen says about this. Paragraph 234, the attributive participle. The participle, like any other adjective, can stand in the attributive position. Example, it will be remembered, see paragraph 70, that's back in chapter 6, that O agathos apostolos means the good apostle. In exactly the same way, O legon tata entoiro apostolos means the saying these things in the temple apostle. All it's doing is identifying the apostle. Which apostle are we talking about? We're not talking about the good apostle now. We're talking about the saying these things in the temple apostle. That's a little bit awkward, but that's exactly what he's saying. And we'll smooth it out as we go along. Now notice, bottom of page 106. The participle with its modifiers is here an adjective in the attributive position. Has the article. It takes the exact place of the attributive adjective agathos in the phrase O agathos apostolos. It is more usual, however, to place the attributive participle with its modifiers in the second of the two alternatives. In other words, you'd expect it to be with an article following the noun, as he says there. The usual order would be O apostolos, O legon, tata, ento hiero. Now, then he says here, the legon, tata, ento hiero takes the place exactly of agathos in the phrase and so forth. Now, the literal translation, this is the second paragraph. Of course, the literal translation, the saying these things in the temple apostle, is not good English.